Hey guys, today I want to go over something special with you. I want to show you, make you a little guide when it comes to the question what kinds of decks should you play, what kinds of decks are right for you. And in understanding what kinds of decks there are, we are basically categorizing the decks into three deck types that are pretty common in card games and that are aggressive slash combo decks, mid-range decks and control decks. And the first thing I will do right now here is show you what it means if a deck is a control deck or a combo, aggression or mid-range deck. So I will show you a few examples. I have a few lists here. Keep in mind please that the lists are not all of them are play ready lists. For example, the Labyrinth list is a bit older. That doesn't matter. It's only that I want to show you the specific cards that make a deck a control deck or an aggressive deck slash combo deck. And I want to show you what these deck types are so that you understand which deck falls into which type, because I think that people tend to like to play one kind of deck. So I am not the biggest fan of combo slash aggressive decks. I'm more a fan of the control slash mid-range decks, but I also knew people that like to combo, that like to play aggressive decks. Aggressive decks tend to play shorter games, while control decks tend to play longer games. And I think that for casual players, so players that are not playing that often, the more combo or aggressive decks are maybe better, because you do not need to know the meta, so the best decks in the game at the current moment, to play at an effective pace. If you want to be successful with a control deck, then you need a better understanding of the game, especially at its current point. And I think with a combo slash aggressive deck, you can sneak out some wins even if you are not quite aware which decks are considered the strongest at any point in the game. So let's just start, and I will define the first extreme point on the scale and the next extreme point on the scale. So first we are going to talk about combo decks, then about control decks, and that makes it easier to define mid-range decks. And then I would be interesting, and please write this in the comments, if you can see some trends with your deck choices. So I for myself, as I already said, I like the combo, the control slash mid-range decks. I like it in that part of the range, you could say. But please let me know in the comments which kind of decks you like, and if you like my kind of videos, then please consider to subscribe to the channel. This helps me out a lot, and give me a thumbs up. This also helps the algorithm find my videos. So let's start here with a MathMech deck, and for fun you can try to think which kind of deck MathMech is. So which example will this be? Will this be combo slash aggressive? Will this be mid-range? Or will this be control? You can stop the video here and just play the guessing game. And yeah, for all the people who are still here, I will now reveal that this is of course is a combo slash aggressive deck. So what makes this a combo deck and what is important to know about combo slash aggressive decks, I will show you a few more in a moment. But for combo decks, it's important to understand that the game plan, the winning game plan of a combo deck, is that you most of the time build a really impressive end board. In the case of MathMech, this consists on the first turn of your MathMech Superfactorial, mostly together, especially in this variant, with an Appaloosa, which can negate opponent's monster effects. The Superfactorial can then summon the Depletion, which can rip one card out of your opponent's hands, one from the field, monster, and one from the field, spell or trap, or the field spell zone. So you basically minus your opponent with this card, and then you also in most cases have an Omni negate with diameter on your Laplacian, so you have an additional negate. The other thing is that this deck can run a lot of hand traps. As you can see here, we have Veiler, we have Ash, we have Nip, we have Imperm, and you can also switch them out. So you basically have a lot of variants to slow down your opponent. So on your first turn you build a board that consists of mostly Superfactorial, your Appaloosa, you have your Cyber's Wicked on it, and your IP Masquerina. And then what is the game plan is that you drain your opponent out of resources, so that they may need to use 4 of their 6 hand cards to break your board. Then they have only 2 left to build their own board. And then on the next turn, it's super easy to kill your opponent on the second turn with MathMech. You only need basically a diameter or circular. Both of them will do, and with this one card, you can go into an access code talker that in combination with the update gemma can kill your opponent with 2 attacks and 4300 attacks. So the goal of an aggressive / combo deck is, and we will see another example in a moment, is to build an impressive board. You can also think of decks like Adamantipator, which also build quite an impressive board with big bodies, with a lot of negates, Apalooza, your Borrowload Dragon, and that mainly want to win so your opponent cannot break the board. But even if your opponent can break the board, that should cost him a lot of resources, and then on the next turn on the backswing you can kill them. So these decks are designed to kill your opponent very fast, and often you need to memorize long combo lines that you need to do and that you need to do perfectly to win the game. Of course, your opponent will interrupt you with hand traps, and at that point there is the point where skill is involved, because then you have to figure out how you can build the best end board with the resources that you still have. So for example, if my opponent ashes my Mathmech Circular, oh wait, that's yeah, he can ash the Mathmech Circular or can destroy or let's say he ashes the Alimbertion, which searches me more Mathmech cards, then I have to think about how I can continue my combo and still end on an impressive board. So that's a combo / aggressive deck with the goal in mind to build a big board and then kill your opponent either on the next turn because he cannot break your board, or on the turn after because you can finish him. Another deck that is also an aggressive / combo deck is Numeron. So as I already said, here in the aggressive / combo deck, the games tend to be very short, and you can also see this with Numeron, of course. They let you go second, then they activate their field spell, send this spell Numeron Calling to the grave, then they summon the 4 guys here, and then they attack you, and these guys, I guess every one of you has already played against Numeron, but these guys double their attack basically, and then can kill you in 1 turn. And you can also see if you play against Numeron, if you can defend against this like 2 times, mostly 2 times, then the deck really struggles to finish you, and it does not have a lot of answers, because this deck doesn't have a game plan for winning the game in the long run, because it's a combo / aggressive deck. So if you can survive the early game against those decks and stabilize, then you mostly will win the game. Same goes for Mathmech. If they have for 1 or 2 turns built a board and you could break it, or you could defend against their killing options. So for example, let's say they on the second turn go for the access code talker OTK line, and you can, let's say, infinite impermanence the access code talker so they cannot kill you with it, then the access code talker on your next turn basically has no effect. You can just kill him, and then it becomes really tough for the deck to kill you, because it's really designed to kill you in 1 swing. Same here with Numeron. And yeah, I've already talked about this, so this isn't a big surprise, but Adamantipator, in this case I have a Sprite Adamantipator, a variant, is also a deck that you could consider a combo / aggressive deck, because with all the Adamantipator cards you are trying to excavate more rock monsters, which can then go into cards like Baron de Fleur, your Apalooza once again. You have a trend, your access code talker to finish the game. You can go into the Risen, who is a negate for spells and traps. You also have Herald of the Arclight, though Herald of the Arclight is more like a thing that is connected to the Sprite package, and we will talk about Sprite in a moment. But this, for example, would be another aggressive / combo deck. Every time that you see your opponent build a very impressive board, Dragon Link is another deck that you could consider combo / aggressive. Also Drytron, because Drytron tries to build the ultimate board with the Herald and negate basically everything that you do. So all of these decks are combo / aggressive decks that need you to remember the combo. You then need to perfectly like do the combo, and you need to know at which points you can alter the combo if you get interrupted. So if you like that kind of play, if you like the short games, if you like to build your board up and see if your opponent can break him and maybe defend against some breaks. So of course it is a skill to know when to use, for example, your Baron de Fleur negate or your Adamantipator Risen spell and trap negate. That is the skill, so you do need to know the meta. So for example, if you play against Tier Elements, it's important to know which cards are important to negate. Of course, you can just negate any card, but then there is a higher likelihood that your opponent will break your board and then win the game. So if you like faster games, if you like to combo, if you like to build big impressive boards, if you like to summon all the end boss monsters that you can see here, I think then combo / aggressive decks are the right way for you. You also have the cool thing that a lot of these elements here, like Access Code Talker or Appaloosa, Baron, you can basically play in every combo / aggressive deck, but of course they can also be used in any other deck, so you can craft these and then use them in a lot of decks that want to do combos or want to be aggressive. So we could now talk about mid-range, but I think it's easier to now define what is a control deck, so we better understand what's in the middle, then that would be mid-range. And we will talk about one deck that we have in the meta at the current moment, which is Tearlament. And Tearlament is a good example of a control deck. In terms of control decks, Tearlament I would consider to be a more soft control deck. There's also a harder control deck that I will show you in the moment, and I will also explain what that means. So how does a control deck win? A control deck wins by using resources more efficiently than your opponent, draining your opponent out of resources, and then winning the game by having more value accomplished over your turns than your opponent could. In the case that you play against a combo and aggressive deck, you win if you survive your opponent's combo / aggressive moves, and then you basically win because you can win the game in the long run and they can't. So why is this a control deck? I think one of the easiest ways to identify a control deck is if the deck has some mechanism that recycles cards. So I think you can only really call a deck a real control deck if there is at least like one mechanism in it that recycles cards at any point. In my opinion, but obviously you can argue about that, every deck that cannot recycle at all, I would more likely put into the mid-range category, maybe into the high mid-range bordering control. So what am I talking about? I'm talking, of course, about the fusion cards here, the Harvness, the Merly, the Chiron, because all of them, if they are milled to the grave, if they hit the grave via card effect, they are able to fusion summon with your graveyard, your field, and your hand. And the fusion materials that you use for these, you basically always have to use these. So you have to use your Merly, your Harvness, and your Chiron. And the materials you use for them, they go back into the deck. And this is the recycling part that I talk about. So you're basically taking resources and putting them back into your deck, and thereby you have more resources in your deck, and thereby you will win the game in the long run. This is of course not the only example here. The other example would be the Keldo and the Mudora, who can also shuffle back cards into your deck. But keep in mind that once you use them, they are basically banished. The reason why I would call this a softer control deck is because there are also the millers here. So a control deck in general does not want to like use or waste its resources to like mill 5 cards to the grave. Of course, the milling 5 cards to the grave enables the other cards, like the Tearlament fusion cards, to then use their effects, and that's the whole game plan, of course. But that's the reason why I would consider this a softer control deck, though it's still a control deck for sure. It uses these elements here to reshuffle or get resources back into the deck and to win the game in the long run. One other reason that you could identify this being a softer control deck is if you ever played against Tearlaments, then you will know that Tearlaments matches, and especially Tearlaments mirrors, can go a very long time, especially Tearlaments mirrors. But there are decks that play way longer games because a Tearlament deck can very fastly kill you, but mostly will not on the second turn. But they can of course. There are other decks that we will talk about next that are very much a hard control deck that does not have the target to kill your opponent very fast. And that's why I would consider this a softer control deck. Let's look at a hard control deck. So Labyrinth, I think, is a hard control deck. Same goes for Eldritch. So let's first look at my criteria for control deck. So I said a control deck basically has cards that are able to recycle your resources. We have this in Labyrinth with the lovely Labyrinth of the Silver Castle, because once every turn you can activate this effect and then reset a normal trap card from your graveyard to your field. So you basically can all the time recycle your normal trap cards that you have a lot of. The next thing that you have here is the Welcome Labyrinth. So for those of you who do not know, you can special summon one Labyrinth monster from your deck, and then this card goes to the graveyard, and if a card leaves the field via one of your trap effects, for example via the compulsory evacuation device, then you can reset this card from the graveyard back to the field, but not in the turn it was sent to the graveyard. That's important to know. So this card can also recycle itself, and there is another wave of Labyrinth support coming, which are also cards that help you recycle. We also have the field spell, which after you activate a normal trap card gives you the ability to special summon one fiend monster from your hand or graveyard. So even if this one gets killed, for example, you can then activate this. Let's say you activate this on your opponent's Cyber Dragon, and then you can resummon this here, and then for example you could activate this effect to again set this. So this basically, these three cards could recycle themselves all the time, and that's why this like ticks all our boxes for control. So why is this a hard control deck versus Telements being a softer control deck? This is a hard control deck because the game plan, or the winning game plan of this deck, is not really to kill your opponents via damage. Of course you will kill your opponents via damage, but let me tell you that in most cases you will just create a situation on the board that your opponent cannot win against. So you are creating that or like a big advantage on your field because you can always recycle your resources. And then, for example, your opponent only has one hand card left, you have the lady on the field, and you always reset your traps, and they basically cannot win anymore. There is no way they can win. Or maybe you have flipped up a Skill Drain and they cannot play under Skill Drain. You flipped up Gozen Match, Tikaboo, whatever. So this deck wins by making the game unplayable for your opponent basically, or they create so much resource advantage via the Lovely, for example, that your opponent cannot win anymore because they cannot recycle resources and they cannot generate resources as fast as you can. So you will have a lot of times that you win a game with Labyrinth, but your opponent has still life points and they just give up because the situation is unsolvable for them. In comparison, Telements, you often win via attacking them and putting their life points to 0. I have another hard control deck here that is Sprite Runic. This, don't get confused, this is only telling me that here were lava golems in this deck, but there aren't any more. I want to say that, of course, the pure Runic deck would be harder control than is this. And don't get confused, I'm not really talking about the Sprite cards here. The thing I want to mention here is more in terms of the Runic cards. We will talk about Sprite in a moment. So Runic as an archetype is also a hard control deck. I think at this point you do understand why that is. You do understand that this is a control deck because of course you can recycle all your Runic quick play spells via your Runic Fountain. This checks our box for recycling. The Hugin, for example, recycles itself when it gets destroyed. It goes back into the extra deck, also recycling. Important to note. And then of course everyone has, I think, played against Runic. The pure Runic deck plays Floodgates, so once again cards like Skill Drain, Tikaboo or Gozen Match, and basically wins like the same way Labyrinth wins against you. But they also have the bonus winning condition of milling your opponent out, of like killing every card in your opponent's deck, because every quick spell, every Runic quick spell has also the effect that once it is activated, then, for example, destroy it, then banish the top 2 cards of your opponent's decks. These banishes the top card of the opponent's decks. Where is it? Banish the top card, and then we have, for example, I think this banishes the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. So this is also another win condition that this deck has, but that is of course also a control winning condition because this takes time. This does not happen on turn 1. This happens on turn, I don't know, 10 or something. So this is another good example for a hard control deck that is Runic, with another additional winning condition that can be a win condition in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that is destroying all the cards in your opponent's deck. So if you like to play longer games, if you like to really understand where you should use your resources and how to optimally use your resources, if you like to learn how your opponent's decks plays and what are the best decks in the meta and understanding the other decks that you play against, I think then it is right for you to play a control deck. Control decks, in my opinion, are the harder decks to play. Let's just look at, for example, Telements. I think then it gets clear what I mean here, but this is also true for the other control decks, though Telement is maybe a bit of an extreme example, because the millers have the effect that basically every game you play is different, because every mill is different. Milling 5 is always random, and because you are not winning the game in the first turn, you basically always have to think about, okay, what is my game plan? How can I generate more resources? How can I generate more advantage? The question of how to generate more resources and more advantage is like stronger question in the harder control decks like Labyrinth or Runic. So you basically always have to think about, okay, do I use my compulsory now on this monster? Or if I use it on this monster, maybe my opponent can play through the rest of my cards and then I lose the game. So I think the decisions that you need to take or make in a control deck need more skill, need a better understanding of the game than does a combo or aggressive deck. Don't get me wrong, these decks also need skill, but I think the skill level that you need to play these decks at a good level is higher. So if you like the challenge, if you are more like a regular player, not like the casual one, then I would suggest you pick up more control decks. The other cool thing about control decks, especially for players who play a bit more, is if you always play the same combo, like for example the Mathmech combo. I have Mathmech as a real deck in TCG. I go to tournaments, live tournaments, and play there. The reason why I bought Mathmech was because it is a strong deck and it's cheap. And other decks that I would have liked to play are way more expensive, so I went for the cheaper one, and I really like to play the deck, but I also know that I prefer the control decks. So the thing is, and that's the point I wanted to make, with combo decks you basically do the same thing every time, and that can be a bit boring. Of course, you need to react to your opponent's decks, and you also, as I said before, need to like think about where to use your interruptions, your negates and stuff, but you always do the same first turn given that you are not interrupted. So that's the reason why I like control decks more, because they need more skill, they are more flexible when it comes to how the games play out, and that's what I like about them. If you like that too, then control decks can be the right thing for you. So now we have defined like the left side of the spectrum, which is aggro/combo, and the right side, which is control, and there in the middle lies mid-range decks. So mid-range decks, as the name already says, is a deck that wants to win in the mid game. So it doesn't really want to win on turn 2 or turn 1. It will not make the most impressive board that you cannot break, but it's also not about recycling your resources and dragging the game out to like turn 10 or something. And I think a good example for a mid-range deck is Sprite. Sprite is a good example for a really mid-range deck. And I will show you two more decks in a moment that I think are more like combo aggro mid-range decks on this side of the spectrum, and then another deck that I think is more like control mid-range. So I will show you three types. I think Sprite is a really in the middle mid-range deck, and that is because if you have ever played against Sprite, they are able to build an impressive board that is hard to break. But you can break a Sprite board and it will cost you a lot of resources. But then after that, Sprite is also able to once again go and have a lot of resources. So they can once again then summon Sprite Blue most of the time. Maybe they have a starter, then can go for a starter, go for Jet, go for Red again, go for Gigantic again. And most of the time, even if you break their board once, they then can once again build an impressive board and do more pressure or put more pressure onto you. Note here that if you ever played against Sprite, you may have noticed that they do not have the most killing power, given that they don't have Sprite Gamma Burst. If they play Sprite Gamma Burst, then they have a bit more killing power, so I would say this is a card that makes the deck more combo/aggressive based than the normal pure variant without this would be. So the mid-range deck is defined by having more resource generation than the aggro deck, and that means that this deck can, once a board gets broken, can easier establish another board and another win con than can, for example, Mathmech. But they cannot recycle their resources as, for example, Tier Element can. As you can see, there is basically no card in here that can recycle you anything. So once your Sprite Blue is in your grave, then your Sprite Blue is in your grave. Of course, you can use your Sprite Elf to revive your Sprite Blue, but the problem is, once you have like used all of your Sprite cards, then you cannot search anything with Sprite Blue. You have no way of putting something back from your graveyard into the deck to then use it again. That's the important thing. Of course, you can recycle resources out of your graveyard, and this makes the deck also a mid-range deck. It can recycle resources, but not that effectively, and if it plays the long-term game against a recycle deck, then it will most likely lose. Of course, it can win. That's not the point. By the way, the number of included hand traps. So Sprite is also a deck where you can include a lot of non-engine, a lot of hand traps. That does not really tell you if a deck is combo/aggressive, mid-range, or a more control deck. So Sprite here, I would say, right in the middle of or between control and combo. So I have two decks left that I want to show you. First being Sword Soul Tenny, second being the Despia, branded Despia deck. So take a moment, once again, quiz for you. I told you that I have one deck, so these are the two decks that are left. One of these decks is a deck that is more to the combo aggressive side, and then there is one deck that is more to the control side. Both of these decks I would consider mid-range decks, but on the spectrum, one is more on the left, one is more on the right. I give you a moment to think about which one is which, and then just pause the video and then hit the play again, and you will see the results, at least to my understanding. So I think let's first talk about Sword Soul Tenny. I think Sword Soul Tenny is more on the left side of the spectrum, closer to being a combo/aggressive deck. Why is that? This deck also is a deck that can make a longer game, can go for a longer game plan and still win. Win in the mid-range, win in the 5 to 6 turn area. Of course, the game can also have a game that goes to turn 10 or 20. You can have, with every deck you can go to turn 10 or 20. But that's not the point. The point is, can the deck still be effective at this point? And that is what is differentiating the different types. So the reason that I think this is more on the combo aggressive side, but still mid-range, as I already said, is because there is really not a lot of resource recycling, and you basically always play the same combo-ish start. So what you are basically doing, for everyone who has played Sword Soul, is that you go for your Moyi, you summon your Grandmaster. Grandmaster searches with its effect the Longyan. Then with Longyan you can make the Baron, and then if everything went well, you maybe have a Blackout or an Impermanence to put on the field, and maybe an Ash or a Maxi in the hand. So this is basically a combo that you do all the time, and this deck then has not a lot of like recycling potential. What you have here, and why this is also considered mid-range in my books, is that even if this board gets broken, then you still have a lot of plays. For example, you can use your Taya to get another token to once again go into Grandmaster, once again maybe go into the Sovereign, or go into the Sinister, Psychic and Punisher, into the Draco Berserker, and then finish the game with that. So if your opponent breaks one or two of your boards, you still have some gas left to kill him. That's the important thing. This is why this is mid-range. But there is not a lot of recycling happening here, and that's why like even less recycling than in the Sprite deck. That is the important point, because Sprite I defined as the middle. And then when we look at Despia, I think that in Despia there is more recycling than is in the Sprite deck. So what am I talking about? I am talking about cards like your Branded Fusion. So your Branded Fusion is a super core card, for example, and you can recycle it from your graveyard back into your hand via your Despian Tragedy. There are a few other things that you can do. Of course, you can summon your Lubellion, and if you summon Lubellion via, for example, your Branded Fusion, then the fusion materials that you use for the next effect, for the Lubellion fusion effect, so if you do not know, this can fusion summon, and the fusion summon materials for this fusion summon here that this card can do will go back into your deck. So it's basically like tier elements. So this deck can recycle resources back into the deck, and that is basically my definition for being a control deck. But I still think that this is a mid-range, hard mid-range / control-y deck. I would not consider this a pure control deck, but a really right-sided mid-range deck. But you can obviously argue me and say that it's the case that this is a control deck. But in my opinion, it is not a control deck because this is the only real piece that can recycle cards back into your deck. For example, you can also use your Albion to use resources, and this is another point with the mid-range strategy. You can use your Albion to use your resources that you have in your graveyard to fusion summon, and then they get banished, so they are not getting recycled, but you can use your graveyard for further plays. And this is what you will see or will experience when playing with or against the branded strategy. This deck has a lot of gas meaning that it can play for a long time, and it can always set up new threats, so always set up new impressive boss monsters. And you also have cards like the Chimera who can draw you cards. So if you manage to survive a turn against Branded Despia and maybe kill or break their board, that does not mean you have won the game. That does only mean that they will most likely put up a few more boss monsters that you will have to finish and then win the game in the longer run. And that is the reason why I would not put this in the control category, because in the long run, the control decks that I showed you, Labyrinth, Runic, and Telements, will beat this deck because they have more control options. Because once you have used your Lubellions, then you have used your Bellions. Of course, you can put the Lubellions themselves back into the extra deck. But there will come a time where your Fallen of Albas will most likely be in your graveyard. Maybe they get banished, maybe you banish them yourself via your Albion, and if that happens, then you can basically no longer go for your Lobellion and no longer recycle. So the recycling of, for example, the Telements deck is way more effective than is for the Despia strategy. But this deck can recycle cards back into the deck, and that is why I would put it on the right side of the scale. So that is it for the video basically. So just to sum it up, for the mid-range type, if you do not want to play the aggressive decks, do not want to play the pure control decks, then you can also play mid-range decks. I like mid-range decks. They are cool. They have like more flexible strategies. It's not like doing the same Mech combo all over again. Of course, you play Sword Tenni and you basically play the same combo on turn 1 every time if you have it. So this is why this is more of a control-ish mid-range deck. But then also, if you manage to get to a longer game like turn 2 or 3 with this deck, then comes the part where you really need to do like nice decisions, where you need to manage your resources right to then win the game in like the midterm or the long term. So just think about this, or maybe analyze your decks. Write me in the comments. I think it's very interesting. Write me in the comments which kind of decks you like to play. Maybe just look over the decks that you have played until now. You can also write me some decks in the commentaries, and I can tell you whether I think these are control, mid-range, or aggressive combo decks. But just think about the decks you like to play and you have played in the past, and then I think you will most likely see a pattern. Most people tend to like one kind of deck more than the other. Of course, you cannot say like, I don't only play control decks. I also play, I love Sprite, for example. I love Sword Tenni, cool decks. I really love Despia. I would wish it wouldn't be destroyed by Ash Blossom that much. I love these decks, but in the end, I would say the control style decks are the decks I like. Though the pure Runic deck I did not really like, because the win con of like just floodgating your opponent or destroying their deck, that I thought was not very fun. So yeah, so I like these decks. I also like to play a combo deck. That's not the point. I also have Mech myself on the other account. But yeah, important thing to note here, that Mech I do not have on this, my first account. I have not Numenon on my first account. And what was the third deck I showed you? I have Emancipator on my first account, but I rarely play it. So I myself tend to play more control and mid-range decks. So I think there is a pattern here. Let me know in the comments what you like, and let me know if you liked the video. And nice that you were here, and I hope we see each other in the next one.